through the week, but still, let's take whatever credit or that we can get along the way. Proverbs chapter 9, verse number 12 is our text. Let's stand together as we honor God's word. It says here, "If thou be wise, thou shalt be wise for thyself, but if thou scornest, thou alone shalt bear it." And let's pray. Father, we thank you again for each one who's here tonight. We thank you for this opportunity to study your word. And we pray that as we do study your word, that you give us understanding. Lord, help us to choose wisdom. And Lord, that we would follow after it, that we'd apply it to our lives, that we might enjoy the blessings of wisdom being applied in our lives. And we just pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. Again, we are looking at wisdom versus foolishness, where in chapter 8, wisdom is personified, but here in chapter 9, wisdom and foolishness are both personified for us. And it is interesting that Solomon leaves the reader to their own conclusion rather than him drawing the conclusion of how things should be and what decisions should be made. He simply leaves that up to the reader. And again, there is a time and place for that. There's a time and place to talk to people and tell them this is the decision that needs to be made. And then there are other times, where the Lord gives us discernment to realize, no, we just need to lay the facts out there. They're going to have to make their own decision regarding that. We saw, or at least we began last week looking at the call of wisdom, and we saw wisdom's preparation, how that wisdom has a place. It's a house, and a beautiful house. We saw wisdom's provision, how that she's not inviting people unprepared, but rather everything's already done. Everything is already prepared. A perfect example of this, I'm going to throw out here. I don't know what you're going to think of this, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. And I mean, you knew I was going to, so I didn't even have to say that. But back in the old days, when we used to have a more traditional church service on Sunday, by which I mean we had a Sunday morning service and then a Sunday evening service, or however the case may be. And back in those days, you get done with church at 12 o'clock or 12:15 or 12:30, depending on who's preaching that particular day. And so you get done around noon-ish, and what's the next thing on the agenda? The next thing on the agenda is food, always. And I can remember as a young boy, some people in the church my dad pastored inviting us over for a meal. And we want you over for Sunday lunch. Great, but they didn't even start considering what they were going to make until they got home. So you didn't actually eat until 3 o'clock, sometimes 4. We had to be back at the church at like 5 or 5:30. It's like, it's a good thing it's not time change. Anyway, so that's the sort of thing that would happen. I don't know what you do or what you did when you were in that sort of situation. I do know what my mom did, and I know what my wife did because I was there. And I can remember even in Papua New Guinea when we first got there. I'm talking about my parents and my sister and I. We first got there, and we didn't have, God hadn't led us to where God would have us establish a church. We're there learning the language and so on. And so we went to church Sunday morning with another missionary. We didn't even have a vehicle. I'm thinking this is really early on. And we would come home. Again, we had a high-set house, so the missionary would pull in under our house because that's where essentially the carport was. I mean, the house was the carport. And so we'd pull under the house, and you could smell the chicken and rice that Mom had cooking in the oven. And do you know what that missionary, what his kids did? Mom, can we stay here? Because they knew there was nothing ready at home. They were going to have to go home and start cooking when they got home. And here we had it. And my wife did the exact same thing. We'd go to church and come home. It was done. Oh my word. It was so good. That's what wisdom did. Wisdom didn't say, hey, come on over. We'll figure it out as we go along. Wisdom said, it's done. Just come on over. Everything's ready. We'll just sit down and we'll eat and we'll have a good time together and whatever. So that's wisdom's provision that we saw. And then we get on over to the next page. We see wisdom's pronouncement in verses 3 through 12. Again, verse 3 gives us her cry. It says, she has sent forth her maidens. She crieth upon the highest places of the city. That's her cry. She's not satisfied. Remember, she sends forth her maidens. We talked about that last week. Everything's ready. I'm letting you know. Come now. I mean, if you want it, come now. And she's not satisfied with just sending them out, which, as we looked at, was the part of the culture of the day. That's just the way they did things. She wasn't satisfied with doing things just the way that things were done. She wanted to reinforce, hey, things are ready. Come on. It's getting cold. And, that sort of thing. And so she had to participate herself. And you find wisdom finding the best places for her voice to be heard, which was the highest places in the city. Again, it's places where her voice is going to carry. That's what wisdom is looking for. That's wisdom's cry. We also see wisdom's call in verses 4 and 5. And here she's not demanding. She's not threatening. You had better come. Sort of like, I can remember back in the day when I was young and we would go out and we'd play all afternoon. And then when you hear mom calling, come and eat, or whatever it was that she called, you knew, okay, it's probably a good idea to hurry up. But when she started calling your name, and especially when she inserted the middle name, you knew, I had better come. In fact, I should already be there by now. That's the sort of thing. That's not what wisdom is doing here. Wisdom's not to the point of, hey, if you're not here in the next 5 seconds, I'm locking the door. We're going to eat, and you're just going to smell it. That's not what wisdom is doing. Wisdom is not demanding. Wisdom's not threatening. Wisdom is inviting. And she's inviting those, we see here in verse 4, who have the greatest need. Those who need wisdom the most, that's the one she's inviting. She's not running around to people who already possess wisdom and say, hey, you need me, because that's sort of preaching to the choir, isn't it? We already know that we need wisdom, or we should recognize that. She has a plan to reach out beyond those who already possess wisdom and go to those who need wisdom. In here in verse 4, it says, whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanteth understanding, she saith to him. And we'll read the rest of that here in just a minute. But it talks about the simple, that's the silly, the seducible, the gullible. I've been going through some of our old family pictures, and I ran across some from when we were at that place where gullible was written on the ceiling. And I know I've talked about that several times, but I just had to stop and laugh while I was scrolling through all of them. But again, the gullible soul is the one who's easily swayed from truth to error. And what wisdom is saying is, no, come in here. Don't wander off. Don't wander out into error and into lack of wisdom. Come in here, because you'll learn better. You'll learn not to be gullible. You'll learn not to be seducible or silly. You'll learn better than what you are. And when we're trying to share the wisdom of the gospel, we're not demanding that people get saved. We're not threatening people. We're inviting people. That's what we're doing. Again, as we're inviting them, We need to invite those who have the need. Those who are saved, it is exciting for me to hear about salvation. I've been saved a long time. But it's still exciting for me to hear about salvation. It's exciting for me to be able to preach about salvation. It doesn't bother me at all to talk about being saved because I know what the Lord did for me. And I appreciate that so much. However, offering salvation needs to be done to those who need it, those who don't have it. And certainly there are simple people. They're gullible. They'll believe anything. Oh, well, we're all the children of God. And the various other ideas that are out there that are untrue, that people will fall into, they're susceptible to those things. And so when we go to people with the gospel, we don't go to them, all right, you listen to what I'm saying, or you're just going to go burn in hell. Now, if they don't listen to the gospel, if they don't trust Christ, are they going to burn in hell? Yes. But why should we use that as a threat to people? We're inviting them to something. And so when we're reaching out and calling to them, we're reaching to those who are in need to invite them. And then it talks about not just the simple, but those wanting understanding or failing to possess heart-based intellect. In other words, all they know is head-based intellect. It's just, it's not real. And we all probably know people like this. They can rattle off things that are true, and then they'll go turn around and do the exact opposite. And you think, but wait a minute, you just said this, and now you're doing that. That's because the intellect or the wisdom, the understanding, is not heart-based. It's just in the head. It never got any farther than that. So there are a lot of people that we know, they understand things or they know things. They just don't know how to put those things into practice. So, yeah. What good is it to know the thing if you don't know how to put it into practice? So again, that's those who are lacking in understanding or wanting understanding. So again, they may have flashes of intellect and fail to possess it, to cultivate it, to maintain it for themselves. And they can't make wise choices on a consistent basis. So they may make a wise choice every once in a while. That's sort of like a clock that doesn't work is still right twice a day. So hey, you're not wrong all the time, but that doesn't mean that you're appropriate or you're doing the right thing. There needs to be a bit more consistency than just twice a day for a clock, especially if we're going to use that for an alarm. And it's set at a time other than when we're supposed to wake up. Of course, if we don't want an alarm, then that's the kind of clock that we want, because the alarm will never go off. But in verse 5, we see that what she's offering is what's already prepared. Excuse me. So she says, come, eat of my bread, drink of the wine, which I have mingled. And notice the past tense, which I have. It's already done. It's already prepared. So she's prepared what she knows is needed, and she has that ready. So then we go on, we can see her concern in verses 6 through 10. And so she gives a sample of her offerings. We haven't seen samples. Have you, any of you who are members at Costco, have you seen how they do samples anymore? It's like, look behind the plexi, we have this. I said, look, down the aisle, they have it without plexi. I can go touch it. But what good is it? Because you're not letting me taste it, and I will not buy it. And of course, most things that they offer, I'm not going to buy anyway because I'm not going to taste it. I already know. This looks like garbage. I'm not eating it. It looks like styrofoam with spray paint, Again. Let's go on. But so they've got that out there, but what kind of a sample is that? That's not appealing. And I feel so sorry for those Costco employees because they stand there like, hey, I have product, must buy. And they look so bored out of their mind because they know they got nothing. So they're talking about this thing as if it's wonderful, but you can't try it, you can't smell it, you can't touch the sample that's sitting there. What good is it? And it really is no good. And I think that's why, as time has gone on, they've done that less and less because nobody's interested in that. So, on the other hand, if you can remember all the way back before all this started, when they used to give out samples, we were at Kingsway Mall, walk past the pretzel place, whatever the name of it is, good pretzels, whatever. And hey, we have samples. Well, what kind? Because yes, I'm that picky. What kind do you have? And they had, I don't know, 3 or 4 different kinds that they had samples. So I tried some, and what did I do? I sent my boys in to buy some, and then we all ate them. Don't look at me like that. You ate them too. So we all ate them, and we enjoyed them, and we remembered them. Why? Because they gave us samples. They did. Hey, look, pretzels, come by. I don't care, but you have samples. There you go. Now, if Ruth's Chris would have samples out on the street, I'd be up there trying it. I wouldn't go in and buy, but I'd try their samples for sure. But what wisdom is doing here is laying out, here's some samples. You want to see what it is? You want to see if it's good or not? Here are some samples for you to try. And so she lays out, first of all, in verse 6, the right process. She says, forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. There's 2 things here. Obviously, forsake the foolish and live. So when is it we're supposed to forsake the foolish? Over in chapter 14 of Proverbs, in verse number 7, we read the when we are supposed to go from the foolish. It says here, go from the presence of a foolish man when thou perceivest not in him the lips of knowledge. That's pretty obvious. So as soon as you figure out there's no wisdom here, then it's time for our feet to be walking away. And so forsake the foolish. Why? Why are we to forsake the foolish and live, it says? It's for your life. So you have somebody who, they're constantly driving like a maniac. And I know we have some people here who, in their younger days, did exactly that. And I know this because they've confessed it to me. I don't think they realized it was confession, but they learned. They learned, sort of like, I'll do a little confession of my own. When I was in Bible Institute, it was we had our midweek service on Wednesday, and after church, everybody had gone except for me and a good friend of mine, David Recod, and his wife. It was the 3 of us, and we're just standing there. I mean, it was late by this time, and it had snowed like nobody's business that day. So we had all this semi-fresh snow because it's after church, but we had all this semi-fresh snow in the parking lot in the church. And of course, the parking lot was behind the building. So we're like, donut zone. So I went out in my little Ford Festiva because clearly that's made for donuts. And I made some miserable attempts at doing donuts, and I came back inside, and David said to me, that was pathetic. And he was right. He said, I've got to show you how to do this. So he goes out in his little, I don't remember what he had, a little Plymouth something. And so he goes out there, does some donuts, and it was better than what I did, but I don't know that it was most excellent at all. He gets done. He comes inside, and about that time, a patrol car comes around the corner with their lights on. And he gets out, comes to the door, and we're just standing there inside, and we did open the door because he asked us to. And the only thing he did, he looked at us and said, "Are you done?" "Yes, sir, we're done." "Okay, good." He gets in his car and leaves. So we went home. We took that as a cue from the Lord. What I'm saying is we can learn. But there are other people that they never learn. Never. They're just foolish. My wife and I hadn't been married very long. We went to a missions conference, and I'm still talking about cars here, so just stay with me. We went to this missions conference, and we were one of the missionaries there. And I don't remember who all was there. There was one couple going to England, and they were just odd, perfect for each other. They were both odd, and so she comes up to my wife. I'll never forget it. Comes up to my wife and says, "Well, we need to get a new car. We've been on deputation for a year, and we've already totaled 3 cars." Well, who is driving those 3 times? I mean, because it begs the question, doesn't it? And she says, "Well, my husband's a terrible driver, so I was driving all 3 times." I think you need to do deputation with Uber or something. Of course, Uber didn't exist back then, but nonetheless, that's, again, it's the fact that they were old enough to know better. They were old enough to have outgrown the stupid stuff that we sometimes do, but they hadn't. They were still foolish. So is that somebody, hey, I need a ride down the road, I'm going to go ride with them? Absolutely not. I'm not going to ride with them anywhere. Why? Because there's no wisdom there. There's no understanding there. Because they keep doing the same thing and hoping to come out with a different outcome. And that is foolishness. And so to get into the car with them is to take your life in your own hands. So what? Forsake the foolish and live. And again, that's just a very practical application. And certainly, wisdom means for it to be practical. It's a principle, yes, but it's meant to be practical in our lives. And then it says, and go in the way of understanding. So find that which is fruitful. Again, where are we supposed to go? In the way of understanding. And this is the way that has been created by God himself. In Isaiah chapter 40 and verse number 14, with whom took he counsel? Talking about God, with whom took he counsel, and who instructed him and taught him in the path of judgment, and taught him knowledge, and showed to him the way of understanding? Nobody, because he's the one who set those things in place. And so when we're talking about, go from the foolish or forsake the foolish and live, go in the way of understanding, what we're talking about is not, again, it's not just worldly wisdom we're talking about. We are talking about God's understanding, which is quite often at odds with worldly wisdom. So this is God's understanding. The truth is, it lays out the order, the proper order for this. Because forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. If you don't forsake the foolish, you're not going to go in the way of understanding. It's just, but I want to be an influence on them. That's not how it works. That's never how it works. So that's the right process that wisdom lays out. Then the right pupil in verses 7 through 9 are laid out for us. And we see, first of all, the scorner in verses 7 and 8. Verse 7 tells us that the scorner causes disgrace. It says, he that reproveth a scorner getteth to himself shame, and he that rebuketh a wicked man getteth himself a blot. So what wisdom is telling us is that when we attempt to teach the unteachable, we are being foolish. And sometimes you don't know somebody's unteachable until you've already let the dog go. You say, hey, let me, and all of a sudden you realize, maybe I would have been better off not saying anything because of the backlash, because of the response. And here in Proverbs 16 and verse number 22, it says, understanding is a wellspring of life unto him that hath it. But the instruction of fools is folly. In other words, it's foolishness to try and teach a fool. Because what good is it going to do you? They're not listening. They're not going to take what you're saying to heart. They're not going to apply it. In fact, what they end up doing, as we see, he that reproveth the scorner getteth to himself shame. That's what ends up happening. What happens is the scorner, who is too foolish to accept instruction, or too smart, we used it that way, but they're unteachable. What they usually end up doing is what? Oh, that person, they thought they were going to, and look at them, and they're so stupid, and they're this, and they're that, right? Isn't that what happens when you try and teach someone who's unteachable? They try and mock you, and they try to put you down as if you're an idiot, when you're not the idiot. You're the one trying to share wisdom with them, but they don't want it. And so wisdom is looking for the right pupil, not the scorner that causes disgrace. Again, attempting to teach the unteachable will provoke pain on our part. Here in Proverbs 15 and verse 12, we're told, a scorner loveth not one that reproveth him, neither will he go unto the wise. There are people I've watched over the years, and I see the direction they're headed, and I think it's not going to work out good. And then I find out they're going around, they'll go around the church to the most carnal people in the church, say, hey, what do you think I ought to do? Whereas the spiritual people in the church, they won't ask them. They refuse to ask, hey, have you asked, the pastor? Have you asked this one? Have you asked that one? Well, I'm not going to talk to them. That's a waste of my time. They don't know my situation. They don't know my story. And so they end up hurting themselves as a result. So the scorner causes disgrace, but also causes detestation. Again, here in verse 8, it starts out, reprove not a scorner, lest he hate thee. And that's exactly what happens. You try and help somebody, and, hey, here's some biblical, godly wisdom. Well, who do you think you are? I'm not that dumb. I know what's right. And they get all indignant and all, hateful. Well, what's going on? They're actually telling you, red flag, I'm a scorner. That's what they're saying without saying that. But the scorner will despise the wisdom of our words, no matter what it is. Even if hey, brother, I really appreciate what you're trying to do, but if you did it this way, not even stop doing what you're doing, but if you do it this way, I think things would work out better for you. Nope, can't have that. Because they're unteachable. They can't be corrected. In Proverbs 23 and verse number 9, speak not in the ears of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of thy words. So we need to be sometimes very sparse with our words when it comes to some people. Let's go on, and we see that in the end, the scorner is going to bear his own punishment. Why? Because he did not avail himself of the wisdom that was offered. He rejected it. And so he is going to end up paying the price. In Proverbs 29 and verse 1, he that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. In other words, you're not going to be able to fix it. Sort of like Humpty Dumpty. Once he's fallen off the wall, it's done. You're not going to be able to put it all back together. And it's the same thing with the scorner. So wisdom's looking for the right pupil, and wisdom's saying, this is not the right pupil here. This is not the one that's going to come in and be helped. Because even if you try to teach them, they're going to hate you for it. So not the scorner, but rather the wise. Here in in verse 8 again, reprove not a scorner, lest he hate thee. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee. So it's the wise that's on the other side of this, the scorner or the wise. And the wise, when wisdom is offered to him, it produces a love for the teacher, because he recognizes the value of wisdom, and he loves those who teach wisdom. So it produces love for the teacher. When my dad and I got to go back to Papua New Guinea in 1996, I know that's before a lot of you were even born, but I was just a young man. It was about, and I'm not even going to tell you. So anyway, Dad and I got to go back. The church, one of the churches that was established under my dad's ministry, was having building dedication, and they had invited us to go. Dad and I were able to go, and it was a blessing to be able to be there and to see what God was still doing. Even though we had been gone, I left in 1989. I'd been gone 7 years, and it was nice to see all the friends and folks, and again, just see what God was doing. But this is church opening or church building opening, and you know how when we want to dedicate a building, we'll like cut the ribbon. They had about 12 ribbons between the back door and the platform up front. And so Dad would cut one and I would cut one, and that's the way they wanted it. I was a teenager the whole time I was there. I didn't feel like I even deserved that. But before we started cutting any of the ribbons, Pastor Peter, he stood there and he said, "We are so thankful for you and for your family coming and bringing the gospel here, because if you hadn't come, none of these people here would be saved." And I'll be honest with you, I got choked up, and I'm going to go on. Otherwise, I'll do it again. But what was going on? It was the fact that we had shared the wisdom of the gospel with them, and they had received it, and because that, they loved us. It made a difference. There were some other people there in the same area that they had heard the gospel, they had rejected it, and they hated our guts. It's just true. I mean, just how it was. Why? Again, it's because they were scorners. They didn't want the gospel. They didn't think they needed it. They thought they were fine. And so as a result, we've already seen what the scorner does. But the wise, that produces love for the teacher. It also produces other things over time. In the moment, wisdom produces greater wisdom. Again, if you don't have wisdom, you just don't have wisdom. But if you have wisdom, then it can reproduce. And we find that here in verse 9. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. So there's an increase because he already has wisdom. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. In the future, wisdom produces honor and favor. Over in Proverbs 13 and verse number 18, We read, poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction, but he that regardeth reproof shall be honored. You do the right thing. How do you get to be an honor student in school? It's not by sitting home playing video games all night. You kind of have to apply yourself to be an honor student, and that's kind of the thing that it's talking about here. You're applying wisdom, and that produces honor. People, again, the fool doesn't necessarily respect the wise, but otherwise people respect otherwise people. They recognize there's something here, there's something good here, there's something that should be here. This young person, they have some wisdom, they're headed in the right direction, or whatever the case may be. And there's some honor that attaches with that, but there's also favor. Over in Proverbs chapter 28 and verse number 23, we read, he that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. And that doesn't seem quite right. And yet, that's what wisdom produces. In the moment, sharing that kind of wisdom, it may produce some anger and some, well, who do you think you are? Why are you saying that to me? What's your problem? Well, you're not perfect. Let he that's without sin cast the first stone. All the things that people say, judge not, and all that. And so that can happen. But then as somebody sits and thinks about it, they think, I hate to say it, but they were right in what they were saying. That is true, and that is. And so what ends up happening in the future, wisdom produces favor. So initially it's, I don't even like what you're saying. But in the future, I had this when I was pastoring down south. There was a couple that came to the church, and they never were members, but they came, and they were fairly faithful unless I talked about the King James Bible. And then he would get all upset, and they'd be gone for 2 or 3 weeks, and then he'd come back. And I kid you not, I didn't plan it. I'd have in my notes about the King James Bible. I didn't know that was his. I didn't know until about the 4th time that was his problem, because he loved the boys, and one of the boys was sitting with him in church while I was saying this, and that boy looked over because he could read, and he told me after church, said, Dad, he's got a parallel Bible. It's whatever different versions it was. He told me what it was. That now I understand why every time I say something about that, he's gone. And he was just so bent out of shape over that. They're not going to change anything, because I'm going to preach the truth regardless. So I didn't change anything. I didn't bring it up just because he was there, but I didn't avoid it either if it was part of the message. Fast forward several years, we were able to be at the church's 80th anniversary. So the church was started in the 30s. It was old church, by our reckoning. So they had church anniversary, and they had almost all of the pastors there. The gentleman who started the church back in the 30s pastored the church all the way up into like 1980, 81. He was like older than dirt. I never knew him. But then there was a pastor after him. So the founding pastor had long since passed away. The fellow that followed him only pastored for about 6 months. He had passed away. And so you're still going from the 80s to the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And so every pastor from that point on was there. And it was just a neat time and enjoyable. This couple was there. And of course, I wasn't preaching, so I didn't have to worry about saying something that would offend him. But he came to me during the course of the meeting. And you know what he did? He apologized. He said, I didn't understand some things that you said and some, this and that, but I understand now. And so, I never had a problem with him, but he had a problem with me, but it all got worked out and everything was great. And he thought I was wonderful. You know, I didn't tell him any different because, you know, you take credit where you can get it, take friends where you find them. But the thing is, I didn't change. Oh, I don't want to make them upset. I'm going to say something else, or I'm going to believe something else, or I'm going to, tailor the way that I say things so as not to make them upset. I didn't do any of those things. Now, again, I didn't try to be mean, and certainly I didn't know. I had no idea for the longest time what was going on. But in the end, there ended up being some favor because of the wisdom. And he recognized that. So, again, that's just a practical illustration of what wisdom is saying, that if we follow after wisdom, it will produce greater wisdom and it will produce honor and favor for us. That's what we ought to be looking for. Well, I want to be wise. Well, then get wisdom. And then that will grow. Sometimes our problem is, if I can't start at this level of wisdom, then I just don't want it. I don't want to work up to that point. That doesn't happen for any of us, and we know that. Nobody starts, 5 years old. Well, let me apply to college. Nobody does that. Yes, there are some child prodigies that graduate at an early age, but it's not 5 or 6. And certainly I know when I was 5 or 6, I was still eating dirt. So no college was, looking to look for me. But the thing is, if we will pursue wisdom, God will grant us wisdom, but then that wisdom will grow. And that's a good thing. That's why we need to make sure that we are the kind of pupil that wisdom is looking for, not the scorner, but the wise, so that little bit of wisdom we start with, that it grows and it reproduces, and that in the end there's honor and there's favor. And that's talking really on a very horizontal level, but certainly that's true in a vertical level. In other words, with God, when God sees that we have wisdom and we are gaining in wisdom, God's going to honor that by giving us more wisdom. And God's going to show us favor because we are applying that wisdom to our lives. So we need to be the right kind of pupil that God would have us to be. Let's stand together with our heads bowed and our eyes closed.